Well, hey, it is great to be with you this morning. This has actually been a pretty crazy week for me. On Tuesday, Joel and I were headed up to a pastor's conference around the Columbus area where I got to teach a breakout session on a couple days on creating churches that are known by what they're for and not against. And so I just got to kind of tell the story of our community to a number of pastors within our area. And we talked about the idea of how anytime we make the story that we're telling as a church about what we're against instead of who we're for, that we exclude people from the story. And how that was never what God intended to do. The story was meant to be wide enough to reach absolutely everybody, and how it's our fault if we shrink it down, which has a lot to do with what we're talking about today. But as we were on our way up there, I went ahead and I was able to teach both breakout sessions. But as we were on our way up there, I got a call from my mom that my grandma had passed away, my mom's mom. And so right after doing that, we went to, or I, not Joel, went to Pittsburgh to do the funeral for my grandma, which was weird, but kind of an incredible privilege. But one of the coolest things that came out of that, I wanted to share with you this part. My grandma was 79 years old, and she had just been fighting health issues for a little while now. And the statement that she made, I think it was 2 days before she passed away, before she was going to have a procedure, the doctor was talking to her about different stuff, and then he asked her how she was feeling. And her statement was, if I get better, that's great. If I don't, that's better. I thought that was just so absolutely incredible. If I get better, that's great. If I don't, that's better. And so it's been a crazy week, but I am thrilled to be here with you this morning. And today we're starting this series, One Hot Summer, which is going to start now, and it's going to go over the next 8 weeks after this. So this will take us all the way through the end of July. And what we're doing in this series is we're addressing topics, issues, questions, things like that that you've sent in, that you've asked us about. And so a lot of the things that we're going to deal with are going to be more controversial in nature. And I'm really excited. As part of all the things we're doing within this series, we're going to have a small group that is specifically devoted to discussing the issues that we've covered. And we're going to meet on Sundays. This is Sunday, just to be clear. We're going to meet today, but every Sunday of this series at 2 o'clock. And we're going to start just back in the conference room, which is in the office. And if there's too many people, we'll expand to the Kid XP whole group room. But if you want to be a regular part of that, you are more than welcome to. If as we go throughout this, I'll announce this every week. But if there's an issue that we cover that you just have questions on or things like that you want to talk a little further, you are more than welcome to drop in every week, or just a week at a time or something like that. But I just want to let you know that we're going to start that today, Sunday at 2, and Sunday at 2 every week after that. And today we're going to start by talking about judgment. And for me, this is really going to set the tone for the series, because I think with the issues that we're going to cover, the only thing that I'm fearful of is that there might be a tendency when you gain information, you can either use it to self-assess, to make yourself better and to make the world better, or you can use it as a weapon against others. And good information in the wrong hands can do a great deal of harm. And so that's why today we're talking about judgment, because we want to make sure that your hands are the right hands to put the information that we're going to cover for the next 8 weeks in. So as we're talking about judgment, I want to start with this statement that we commonly hear: only God can judge me. Only God can judge me. We were driving the other day, I think it was around Maysville, and there was a truck, and on the back of the truck it had this big statement: only God can judge me. And we hear this a lot. You may go to somebody, hey, I don't think you should drive 100 miles per hour. Only God can judge me. Maybe you shouldn't have another drink. Only God can judge me. Maybe you shouldn't give your kids Benadryl when they're not sick. Only God can judge me. I don't know if that's a relationship you want to get involved in. Only God can judge me. Hey, did you send me this text from the toilet? Only God can judge me. Hey, did you have McDonald's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Only God can judge me. Hey, swimming is not a proper substitute for a shower. I disagree. But only God can judge me. And then here's this is the one I always feel it this way. When you're like binge watching a Netflix show and you're like 4 or 5 episodes in a row, and then Netflix comes up with "Are you still watching?" Which is like shouldn't you be doing something better with your life? Like, do you have no responsibilities? And I'm like, Netflix, only God can judge me. Watch next episode. So here's the deal. We're talking about this today because I think there's a tendency for all of us to feel judged at times. And I think that this is, in a lot of ways, the reputations that Christians have. A lot of this is warranted, that we are judgy. And no one really wants to feel judged. No one wants to be in that position. But here's the intriguing thing to me with that statement of only God can judge me is, first off, like, it's not true. Like, you may be saying only God should judge me, or only God can pass a verdict on my life, right? Like, you just say one of those. I feel like only God should judge me, or only God can actually make a statement, like pound the gavel as to who I am and what I'm sentenced to. But the actual statement of only God can judge me is completely inaccurate, because instead of like, only God can judge me, like, that's not true. I'm judging you right now. There's nothing you can do about it. So, but here's, as we look at it, I want to make sure this. We kind of get this, we have misinformation about what Scripture says about judgment. And we kind of run to one side or the other. We either think that we can't maybe like make an objective statement or even consider whether or not something that someone is doing is wrong. And so we just kind of fall back and they're like, oh, I'm not the judge. I can't say anything. This person is doing something that is harmful to them and harmful to the world around them. Nope, I'm not getting into that. That's God's job. And so we kind of run on that end, or we kind of view ourselves as like the moral police of the world. And it's our responsibility for friends, family, strangers, neighbors, coworkers, kids, other parents, other kids of other parents. Like, you just like go down the list that it is our responsibility to hold all these people to a standard. And the Bible doesn't say either. And so this is what I want to do today. Pretty simple. I want to look at 3 passages that talk about judgment. And at the end of the 3 passages, we're going to have 5 statements that for us is going to build our biblical framework of what does the Bible show us about our role within judging the world. What's right? What's wrong? Where are we called to step in? Where are we called to shrink back? What is the posture that we are called to take when it comes to this issue of judgment? So if you have your Bible with you, we're going to start in Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7 is where you're going to begin. If you don't have your Bible with you, I've also got the references on there. Obviously, we'll have the scriptures on the screens, but I'll have the references on there in case if you want to look at these at a later date to kind of go back if you forget, how did we get to that point? What did this say here? So you can check that out at a later date. So we're going to start with Matthew chapter 7, verse 1 through 5. This is the most probably famous passage in Scripture when it comes to judgment, and these are the words of Jesus. So he says this, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged." That's usually where we stop. What does the Bible say about judgment? Do not judge. That's it. End of story. And it's like, well, don't interrupt Jesus. Like, he's still talking. He's got more to say. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. In the same way that you judge others, you will be judged. Now, here's something incredibly significant. He's not talking about God right there. He's not. He's saying, don't judge others, because in the same way you judge others, they will judge you. The standard that you hold others to will be the standard that others hold you to. And so he's going like, hey, we kind of often have this like common problem, and I understand this, like the flaws that we are most aware of in ourselves are the things that we're quickest to call out in others. You felt that. The people who annoy me the most are people who are competitive, who talk a lot, and who have an obscene amount of freckles. Maybe not so much the third one, but the first 2. And we'll get into something like, oh, they're just so competitive. I don't know why they're so competitive. I know why that bothers me. Like, it doesn't take me long to figure out. But he's saying, hey, the same thing. The way that you judge others will be the way that you're judged. Now, what he's saying here is he's talking about passing a verdict. Having that like objective standard, that whole thing that we said at the beginning, like only God can judge me. And we maybe say, hey, only God can pass a verdict on my life. And then Jesus' tone switches and he uses different language. So I want to show you this feel. So this is starting in verse 3. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? So the metaphor makes sense? He's saying like, why when you have like this massive problem, would you point out this little problem that someone else has, even if it relates? Why when you have like these big issues you need to work through, why would you spend your time focusing on the little issues of someone else? And here's the thing that I think is interesting. Is he actually asks it. Like, he actually goes, hey, why do you do this? He says later on, he says, how? How could you say to your brother? How could you actually go through it? And I know why. I know how. So do you. If I don't feel great about how I am or who I am or what I'm doing or how I'm doing in a certain area, it just makes me feel a lot better to push off of someone else. If I can't elevate my confidence to a certain level, then I am more than happy to pull you down to lift myself up. That's no problem at all. We kind of look at it's the quickest way to do it. We look at it in the sense of there's two ways to swim. You can get out in the middle of the water, you could just start swimming by yourself, or you could push off from the wall. It's way easier to push off of the wall. And that's what most of us do when it comes to the issue of our ego, our pride, our assessment of ourselves. We are more than happy to push off of someone else in order to elevate ourselves. And Jesus is going, no, that's not your calling. And then he clarifies stuff for us in this last statement. This is verse 5. He says, you hypocrite. It's got to make you feel good. You hypocrite. First, take the plank out of your own eye. And that leads us to our first statement of 5 on judgment, which is this. Evaluate yourself first. Evaluate yourself first. You are not called to lose discernment. You are not called to never judge. But Jesus says the first thing that you need to be aware of is you need to evaluate yourself first. As a society, we do a wonderful job of having for everyone to have a few soapboxes which they can stand upon to condemn the world around them. And every single thing, every problem in the world comes down to these issues. I had a friend on Facebook who posted the other day, he goes, I promise you there are at least 24,000 more problems that are greater in our culture than participation trophies. I was like, oh, that's good. I don't know if I agree. Maybe just 12 for me, but sure, that's fine. I'll stick with the 24,000. But we do that. We just kind of have a tendency that, hey, the whole world comes down to these couple issues. But Jesus is saying here, no, hang on a second. Evaluate yourself first. Make sure there's not a log. Make sure you don't have this massive gaping problem and you're just pointing out this little other problem that someone else has. Evaluate yourself first. And then he says this. This is how he closes this one teaching. So he says, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Now, this is massively important because the common understanding is that the Bible simply says, do not judge. We just take that first verse of what Jesus says, and then we cut him off. He says, do not judge. We go, okay, Jesus, we've heard everything we need to hear. Thank you. He goes, no, I got more. I'm still talking. And he gets to the very end of that, and he says, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So we do have a call to remove specks or logs or forests, if we're going to continue on that metaphor, of the problems from those around us. But he does it in a different posture. See, for him right here, he's not talking about like passing a verdict on someone. He's not talking about going through the situation and go, you right here, you are wrong. This is absolutely false. No, his posture is different because he's not using the word judge here, even though he's talking about a similar thing. So here's our second point for today, is that our primary call is to decipher a situation, not deliver a verdict. Our primary call is to decipher a situation, not deliver a verdict. That one may be kind of confusing, so let me explain it like this. We have had, within the time that I've been a pastor, there have been a couple times where we've had to, the official term, which no one likes, I don't even like, is to enact church discipline. Everybody feels all good. I can see you just light up when I talk about church discipline. Where we've had to make some statements or take some steps in individual people's lives. I'm not going to get into any of the messiness of that. I will show you the purpose of those things as we get to the end of this message and look at those other points. But where we've had to go through wade through some difficult waters. And every single time I've been a part of that, I don't have, I want to say confidence, but the right word is I don't have the arrogance to come before someone else and say, I can see this entirely clearly. I have researched all the information and looked at all the facts, and I know for certainty this is right or this is wrong. I just don't have the arrogance to do that. Anytime I've been in that spot, I've said this, hey, we've gone through this, we've looked at these different things. This is what we're going to do. I can't see everything. I don't know everything, but I believe this is what we're called to do to make best of the situation that we're in. You see how those are fundamentally different? You see how one has a sense of, like in the first sense, you take the position of God and you're going, this is right, this is wrong. And I kind of view it at the end of the day, every single one of our positions is subjective because we can't see everything. We don't know everything. And so, whereas an individual Christian, where do we get off thinking that all of a sudden we're the one person who sees things clearly? Yeah, I don't think we're called to shrink back. I don't think we're called to be spineless within that situation as well. But to approach things, maybe at times taking bold stands, taking difficult stands, but doing it with humility is massively important. And that's what I believe Jesus is talking about here, that our call, our primary call, is to decipher a situation, to figure out and move forward on things as we see it, not to deliver a verdict. So, that makes sense? Slight nod of the head if you're with me. Cool. Everybody happy? I talked about church discipline. Did I lose anyone? You're already gone, so you wouldn't know if I'm asking you now. So, all right. Okay, that's the first passage. Next passage that we're going to look at, John 7. John 7, this is verse 21 through 24. We're going to look at Jesus' words as well. The setting for this passage that we're going to look at now takes place. Jesus has healed somebody on the Sabbath, which for them was a big no-no. Like, this is a big problem because for the religious leaders and the Jewish people in the first century, well, honestly, still for the Jewish people today, but he's operating within Jewish culture, they had extensive laws as to the things you could do and the things that you couldn't do on the Sabbath. They had extensive laws because they were forbidden from working on the Sabbath, which, just as a note, common understanding, for them Sabbath was Saturday, not Sunday. But so for Saturday, for them, they were taught to honor the Sabbath and keep it holy, which meant to do absolutely no work. So they had like all these just meticulous laws about the work that you could do and the work that you couldn't do. And part of the forbidden things of work you couldn't do was to heal. Like, that was considered, and for them, in their understanding, it was more like medicine, doctors, things like that. But you couldn't work to heal. And so Jesus comes and he heals somebody on the Sabbath. And they are outraged and amazed. So in this like incredibly difficult spot, like he's done something like, this is great. Like this is a wonderful thing that he did, but he's not allowed to do it. Like, how do we comprehend that? Like, fantastic job, Jesus, let us put you in jail. This is a big no-no. So this is what happens. Jesus' response to them being upset. It says, Jesus said to them, I did one miracle, and you are all amazed. Yet because Moses gave you circumcision, though actually it did not come from Moses, but from the patriarchs, that's a longer story to get into, you circumcise a boy on the Sabbath. Now let's pause right there, talk about that briefly. Circumcision, let's just talk about religiously, was a way that they identified themselves as set apart, okay? So that's all we really need to comprehend right now. Circumcision, in terms of religion, was how they identified themselves as distinct. Circumcision biologically, ask your mom. So, or Dr. Coleman, and Keaton, because they do that a lot. So, now moving on, verse 23. He says, now if a boy can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing a man's whole body on the Sabbath? He goes, hey, here's the deal. You have these laws that a boy after he's born has to be circumcised after so many days. Yet if that day happens to come, I think it was the 8th day, which is way too late in my opinion. But that's another issue. But he goes, hey, if that 8th day, if that happens to fall on the Sabbath, you circumcise him anyway, even though you're not allowed to do work on the Sabbath, because you understand circumcision is doing good. And so how do you navigate that? And then he clarifies it right here at the end. He says, stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. Stop judging by mere appearances. This is one of those other things that if you come at it with the framework, with the, I'll say simplistic understanding that the Bible simply says do not judge, that's where you cut Jesus off again. Stop judging. That's what Jesus said. Stop judging. He says, no, stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. So in a sense, he is encouraging us to judge, but there is a posture and way in which we are to do it. And that's our third point for this morning. Judgment must take into account their motives. Judgment must take into account their motives. I have, until I was about, I'll say 14, had never done anything wrong. I always had a reason. I always knew why. And there was one incident that, this doesn't directly relate, but I'm already telling this story, and I really want to tell this story. So in my family, I have an older sister, I have a younger sister. I was not allowed to hit my sisters under any circumstance. I was not allowed to touch my sisters. It didn't there were situations where my sister hit me and I hit them back and I was the only one punished. And I was like, what's going on? And they're like, you're not allowed to hit your sisters. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so my sisters got wind of this rule in my house. And so they just started beating on me. And I tried to plead to my parents. And there was this one time that, I know this sounds like such a damsel in distress story that's fabricated, but I promise you it's true. So there's this one time that my mom gave us chores every summer morning. We wake up in the summer and we knew we had a list of chores, which was good for character, bad for relationship with my parents. But you can decide how you want to navigate that as a parent. So my job this one day was to sweep the floor. So I had to sweep the kitchen floor. So I got out the broom, and I'm sweeping the floor, and my younger sister had to, unload the dishwasher, do something like that. And so as I'm sweeping the floor, I had, everything done except for under the dishwasher. So Megan, she's, there, and she's unloading the dishwasher, and I'm trying to sweep underneath it. And let's just say where her legs were, I'm not being extremely careful, and I don't really care. Maybe a little vengeful because of past things, so I'm going along. And so Megan turns, and she turned to kick me. And I knew I wasn't allowed to hit Megan. And so I put the broom in front of me so I could stand behind it, and she kicked the broom. And she told my parents that I hit her with the broom, which was previously true, but not true in this moment. And then this is not as much helpful, but this is kind of how things function in my family. So she goes and she kicks the broom, and she hit it with her shin. And so it's got this big, massive mark on her shin. And this happens at 10 o'clock in the morning. My mom's coming home at noon for lunch. And so what my little sister did for the next 2 hours is she sat there and she further indented the mark on her shin so my parents would know, I know, injustice. Is this not ridiculous? And so my mom gets home and she's like, what happened? And she's like, Kevin hit me with a broom. I was like, I did no such thing. I was sweeping the floor. on my own, doing the chores that you had called me to do to help you while you're at work, Mom. And she kicked me. And so I got like grounded for like 2 weeks because of that. But I didn't have to sweep the floor anymore. That was a benefit. But it took me, because I was an arguer and I was thorough and I thought through scenarios. Anytime I had wrong action, I had a right excuse. And I was good to go on that. But anytime someone else had the wrong action, their excuses didn't matter. Their scenario, their situation, their perspective, doesn't matter. You did what's wrong. You weren't supposed to do that. And our tendency to grade ourselves on a curve, but to hold others to an objective standard is something that's common within each of us. I'm not saying that we're called to grade everyone on a curve, but I think that it is significant that we take people's perspectives and motivations into account. We look back at Jesus' most famous set of teachings, the Beatitudes, where he says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Now, he doesn't say blessed are those who pursue, blessed are those who have achieved, or blessed are those who are consciously living in. No, he says blessed are those who hunger and thirst. I think what Jesus is pointing to right here is that our motivations and desires matter a great deal. And we often don't take that into account when we look at other people's situations. I believe, I know I'm spending way too much time on this one point. I believe at the end of the day, every problem in the world is a pride problem, which means it's a sin problem. I believe the ways that we shrink back are because we have an improper understanding of who we are in God. I believe the ways that we act out are because we have an improper understanding of who we are in God. And we have a tendency just to look at the actions that someone takes and just go, oh, that's wrong, and never take another second and go, why are they doing that? I'm not saying that we're all called to be psychologists, but we're called to care at a level of depth that takes a look at people's desires and motivations. So judgment must take into account their motives. Alrighty? So, third passage. This is the fun one. This is the one you'll want to remember and write home about. I don't know what that means, but there you go. So 1 Corinthians 5, verse 1 through 2. It says this. This is the Apostle Paul. This is not Jesus. This is Paul writing to the church in Corinth, dealing with a specific situation. Paul, who was the hero of the New Testament, who took the message of Jesus to most of the known world. He says this. It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and of a kind that even pagans do not tolerate. A man is sleeping with his father's wife. Ooh, that should be the response. Now you don't want to do that. That's fine. And then this is how he gets into the response. This is verse 2. He goes, "And you are proud." You know why? Because they're cool. They're not going to judge. Who are they to judge? God's got grace. So I mean, like, who am I to say what they're doing is wrong? We've all done wrong, right? So, I mean, we should just let them in. I'm not going to tell them. Are you going to tell them? That'd be awkward. No, I don't even know how to have that conversation. Sound like maybe something that would happen today? He goes, and you're proud to be accepting. And then he says this. He says, shouldn't you rather have gone into mourning and put out of your fellowship the man who has been doing this? He gets into his own perspective in there in the in-between verses. I'm going to jump down to verse 9 where he picks back up the specific storyline. He says this. He says, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral, or the greedy and swindlers or idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave this world. He says, hey, I told you not to associate with people who are consistently living in sin, which is a word we don't use often in our culture, but I think we need to recover. He says, I told you not to do that. But I'm not talking about people who aren't Christians, because if you're going to do that, you couldn't even just seclude yourself. You would have to leave earth in order to be completely away from sin. And he gives further instruction. He says, but now I am writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister, but is sexually immoral or greedy, an idolater or slanderer, a drunkard or swindler. Do not even eat with such people. This may sound harsh, okay? Let me get to the ending and we'll make sense of it. Because you'll be like, oh my goodness, wow. So he says this. He says, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. Expel the wicked person from among you. Two key things he says there at the end. First one is this. What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? And here's the fourth point that we're going to look at this morning. We have no basis to judge outsiders. We have no basis to judge outsiders. Someone who does not claim to follow Christ, does not confess to be a Christian, those are the people who we hold up as easy targets, or at least the Christian community as a whole does in America today. And he goes, who are you to even consider them? Like, as Christians, we have a set standard that we claim to hold. He goes, they don't claim to hold that standard. That would be the equivalent of, let's say, I was going to use a soccer metaphor, but not everyone understands the rules of soccer, so I didn't want that to be confusing. So we'll go football metaphor. We feel more comfortable with football? Maybe not. Basketball? Basketball metaphor. We'll go with a basketball metaphor. Let's say there's a basketball game going on. I've got to make this up as I go. All of a sudden, the ref stops. He blows his whistle, calls a technical foul, which means someone did something really bad, if you're unfamiliar with the rules in basketball. Technical foul, points to the dude way up in the stands, and says, you said a bad word. Now, what would we do? We go, what? He's not playing. Like, he's not even in the game, right? This is what happens when we judge those who don't claim Christ. Is we go, oh my goodness, I can't believe they did that. They're so wrong. And God's going, yeah, but they don't follow me. They have no basis. This is where the majority of our judgment lies. But we have no basis to judge outsiders. And then here's the second thing that Paul says at the end that I think is incredibly important. He says, expel the wicked person from among you. Which sounds really harsh, doesn't it? But here's why. You need to understand why. And I don't have time to cover all the scriptures in which he says this. The reason why Paul points to within this is the reason why you remove someone from the fellowship, which I have never been a part of in a Christian community, is so that they would be aware of how destructive their actions are. He says, you do that so they can consciously realize, so they can be able to acknowledge their sins, so they can move back to what's right. And then even in 2 Corinthians, and again, in 2 Corinthians, the next letter he writes to the church in Corinth in chapter 2, he brings back up this guy who was doing these horrible things, and he says, hey, here's the deal. Even though he hasn't come back, you need to already forgive him. And I think that's massive. He goes, hey, these people who do wrong, your responsibility is to already forgive them, even though they haven't confessed what they've done wrong. And when he acknowledges what he's done wrong, you need to welcome him back in open arms. And so we kind of get this sense that it's like, anytime something does someone bad, we just go, get out. We're so mad at you, which is, I understand why that's the posture that Christians often take, because they feel hurt within those situations. But he goes, no, your actions are always, whether it's someone inside or someone outside, is to lead people to Christ. And so that's our fifth point for today. That the goal is reconciliation and restoration. Any judgment that we make must have as its goal reconciliation and restoration. If you ever judge, I don't mean verdict, I mean discern, in order to prop yourself up and make yourself feel better, you are doing it wrong, and your motives are not pure. If it doesn't have as its goal reconciliation and restoration, then we're off. And I think that's massively important. Now, here's the deal. I show you those 5 things because I think our tendency, as we see what's wrong in the world, is to either lash out, and we kind of take the bullhorn Christianity mentality and we tell the world what's wrong, or it's to shrink back in a corner and to quietly feel superior to everyone else. And we're not called to have either of those postures. A story is an example. So recently, I am not good at housework. Housework was the maintenance. Some of you are like project people. Oh, we have projects. Like, I want to curl up in a corner in the fetal position and begin weeping anytime Bethany has an idea of a house project, because my expertise level is right down here. And the other thing, and my wife is wonderful in so many ways, but she is not wonderful in the one area, this has nothing to do with character, I know I'm already on shaky ground with you, at throwing objects. So like you have something like maybe you're 10 feet apart and you say, hey, will you toss me the keys? I never say that to Bethany. Because the keys are going out the window, they're putting a hole in the ceiling, something like that. I don't know what it is. She can throw a softball fine, she can throw a baseball, she can throw a football wonderfully. But when it comes to throwing small objects, that is just not her niche. And so the other day, she was downstairs in our basement, I was upstairs, I needed a towel, I had spilled something, I said, hey, will you throw me up a towel? So she goes to throw the towel, and we have like a chandelier that's like right above her head. Right above her head! And instead of like making it up the steps, she throws it directly above her and knocks out the chandelier. And so it's not working, none of the lights are on, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I looked at her and I go, I don't know how to fix that. You know that. I don't know how to fix that. And so we called someone and they came over to fix it, and they were down there for like 10 minutes, and they came upstairs and he goes, did you change the light bulbs? I went, no, like she threw the towel and then it didn't work. It was on. He goes, yeah, I think all your light bulbs had gone out except for one. And when she threw it up, it must have just knocked the last one out. And so I just changed the light bulbs and it works fine. It was dark because the light bulbs weren't working. It's like, we felt a little dumb. Thank you for coming over to change our light bulbs. But for me, that story, I think, is massively important for understanding our posture as Christians when it comes to judgment. Our tendency is this, is we look at the world and we claim that it's dark, and then we point our finger at the world and say, why are you so dark? The call that Jesus gives us is to be light. The reason why the world is dark is because the light is not doing its job. And so anytime we sit back and we complain or we condemn about and think about how dark the world is, what we are doing is we are incriminating ourselves. The world is supposed to be dark. We're supposed to be light. And so when we remove the subject of judgment from the conversation, I think in the many ways that we're called to love well, we remove one aspect in which we are called to be light to the world that we live in. And so here's, of these 5 things, if you don't get any of them, if you didn't write any of them down, I'm not offended, that's fine. It's not like I worked that hard on them anyway. So, but here's the one thing I want you to know. That our call is to make the world better, one relationship and one courageous conversation at a time. This is the purpose of judgment. This is why we have it. To make the world better, one relationship and one courageous conversation at a time. And here's my hope. This is all set up for the next 8 weeks. My hope as we delve into some of these difficult subjects, which we've had people ask, why are you doing this? Like, isn't this going to be awkward? Isn't some of this going to be uncomfortable? For me, I don't have that posture. I'm just more curious than anything else. It's like, hey, there's a dark, scary noise in the wood, and I heard a glint like shining from metal. I'm like, oh, let's go see. I'm curious. So that may be what I'm doing as we head into the summer. But I really think it's a matter of this, that we need to understand a biblical framework in terms of how God calls us to live in the world that we live in. Otherwise, we're not able to love the world well. A lack of understanding of truth puts us in an anemic position to love those around us and to lead them to life. And you do no good to the person who, let's say, we saw that wonderful story of Lenora earlier. You do no good for the person who, let's say, is addicted to pat them on the back and say, you're doing great, you're fine. That's not helpful, that's not loving, that's not kind. And so if we don't have a proper understanding of what truth is, we can never lead people to life. And so that's why we're covering some of the things that we're going to cover. And I want to say this just as we start, and I'm sure I'm going to say this many times over the next 8 weeks. There are going to be things that we talk about that I say that you're going to disagree with. You have a couple options when you disagree with me. We can fight in the parking lot. No, that's not an option. You could just accept it, which I don't want you to do because I think that's naive. You could just disagree with me, which, for lack of a better word, that makes you a bigot, to not further investigate beliefs. In the same way that if someone disagrees with me and I have no basis for listening to them or anything else, that makes me a bigot. You have a third option if we cover things and things are said that you disagree with, and that's to investigate it and to understand it further, to lead yourself to a further understanding of the truth. And that's my hope. That as we delve deeper into how God guides us to live in the complicated and oftentimes not black and white, but very gray world that we live in, is that we would be able to love people well. And that's what I trust you to be able to do. So, let me pray for you. God, I'm grateful for the time that we've shared together story. God, I'm grateful for the songs that we sang, for the truth that we were able to proclaim, for the story that we heard and the stories that we're yet to hear about people whose lives have been changed in you. And God, I just pray for all of us here, as a community, as a congregation, as a church, that we would love the people around us well, that we would approach situations and difficulties and complexities and complications with boldness, with courage, with humility. With an understanding that you are the one who gives life, you are the one who loves well, and that you are the one who leads us to truth. And so, Lord, let us have the courage and strength to pursue exactly that, knowing that you are the author of life, and that you're the one that we need, and you're the one that our world needs. And so help us to know you closer so that we could love you deeper as we engage the world that we live in. And I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Amen.